Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yeah, so glad to be here with all of you. Um, yeah, I'm doing this and it's going to be good. And it looks like I'll be on here for a little bit, and then I'll have to get off and go back to covering the UN Security Council meeting. But I've got a good hour and a half here or so to engage with all of you. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it. Let's do it.
American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. It's yet another stream that we're doing here, and it's the afternoon, and so I am announcing that I am going to do something that I've been doing a little bit more lately. Again, we'll see. Sometimes I do it and nobody wants to jump on, but other times I do it, and we have some epic conversations. I am going to open up this stream. I'm opening up the stream. I am opening up the stream. So if you want to jump on and give me a piece of your mind, you can join the stream. Let me just drop the link here in the chat. I'll drop it in Rumble and on Rockfin as well. If you want to join, come on and give me a few words. That's fine. We are opening the phones, as they say in the radio profession. You can join the stream if you want to give me a piece of your mind. Opening the phones, as they say. But anyway, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks tend to be followed by a roll call. And then after that, I just answer people's super chat or Rumble rant or Rockfin tip questions for the rest of the show. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat, send me a Rumble rant, send me a Rockfin tip, give me something to respond to. I will engage with what you have to say. So just a quick reminder to everybody, we are having an amazing conference coming up at the end of the month. It's going to be a really, really excellent event. It's going to be in Portland, early December. It's going to be really, really an amazing event. So we need you there. We need you to register for the event, and we need you to donate to help us do the event. So if you can join us with Scott Ritter, Nick Brana, and others, it's going to be really, really important. So don't forget about that. Just want to remind everyone about our important conference that is coming up. Please make a point of being there. It's going to be really, really great. It's going to be really, really important. So please be there. So there's that. If you want to hop on and join the stream, give me a piece of your mind, send me a super chat for something to talk about in the second half of the show. That would be awesome. And I guess, we'll just jump right into it. What's on my mind today? First of all, I'll pour some unnamed diet beverage. You don't know what beverage it is because I don't name it. I don't show it on the screen, but I think you can all guess. I think I've accidentally shown it a few times on this stream before, but I try not to reveal what it is. No product placement here. I drink my unnamed diet beverage because it's got caffeine in it. Cheers. And folks, when we talk about what we're up against, when we talk about what we're fighting for, what we advocate, there tends to be quite a bit of confusion. And I think this confusion is what causes a lot of people to dismiss the ideas that we put forward. I got to tell you, I'm at the point where I almost don't want to tell people I'm a communist because they don't understand what that means. It used to be that if I told people I was a communist, they had no idea what that meant, or they thought it just meant a dictator or something, and I could educate them. But now, if I were to tell people I was a communist, and I do, people immediately think that I'm a transgender teenager with pink hair who thinks all Republicans are Nazis and wants to punch Trump supporters. And I ain't that. And that is not what I am. And I almost don't want to tell people that I'm a communist because I don't want people to think that I'm something other than what I am. When I call myself a communist, I'm considering myself to be what the Chinese Communist Party is. I'm considering myself to be what the Vietnamese Communist Party is. This weekend, I was in Russia at a gathering, and I got to meet with the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union, which is the young communist group of Vietnam. And they're not transgender teenagers with pink hair. That ain't what they are. I got to meet with the Union of Young Communists of Cuba. Again, you know, they are LGBT inclusive, but they're not a group of angry teenagers who are obsessed with transgender stuff. That's just not what they are. And so it gets very, very difficult. It gets very, very difficult to get people to understand what you advocate. You know, and that the communist world has largely changed. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union's not going to come back. Meanwhile, the Western left has completely lost its mind, and is not what it once was, and is not in line with the global anti-imperialist camp and what they believe in. So what are we? What do we advocate? Well, the first thing that needs to be understood is what we are against is imperialism. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage. Imperialism is the rule of the world by big banks and corporations, trusts, cartels, and syndicates, an international financial oligarchy. That is what imperialism is. Imperialism is not something you do. It's not a policy. Imperialism is a system. And it is the development of capitalism. Early capitalism is what you call industrial capitalism, where it's the factory owners, the captains of industry that dominate. But imperialism is another stage of capitalism where the bankers and the financiers dominate. Lenin wrote an entire book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And in our textbook, We Are City Builders, in our textbook, we quote the very language. And we have a whole section about imperialism and what imperialism is. And we quote all of this. And we talk about it. Imperialism is the development of capitalism to the point that it becomes financialized, and to the point where the main way Western finance houses and institutions maintain their global dominance is through holding back economic development. Imperialism does not bring development. Rather, it holds back development. And this is the important thing to understand. Imperialism does not bring development. When the British Empire went to India, they saw a group of people who'd been weaving for thousands and thousands of years. What did they do? Did they bring development. They say, wow, we can make a lot of money from all this weaving that they're doing. And they put them to work weaving and made money from it. No. They burned the looms. And they did this in Bangladesh as well. They burned the looms of Bangladesh. The British Empire went to the developing world and it destroyed industrialization. And it forced India to then import its cloth from Britain, from British textile mills. And the same thing happened in Mexico in the 1990s. The people in Mexico have been growing their own food since the beginning of time, since before Christopher Columbus showed up. However, under NAFTA, Bill Clinton created a situation where American agribusiness could penetrate Mexico and put all the Mexican farmers out of business. And now Mexico imports the bulk of its food from the United States. They're no longer growing their own food. Haiti is a similar situation. There used to be farmers all over Haiti growing their own food. Now Haiti imports its food from the United States, what food they can afford. And many Haitians are desperately poor, and they're drinking dirt mixed with oil. Imperialism is about holding back economic development. Iraq used to be a major oil exporting country that was selling oil on the international markets in competition with American oil companies. And now, that's a good question. And now Iraq is a deeply impoverished country that's been blown to bits, and its oil exports are about 10% of what they once were. Libya used to have the highest life expectancy on the African continent. It had the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. It had huge, huge development. And it largely paid for that development with state-controlled oil resources. Now Libya has been blown to bits. And its oil exports are less than 10% of what they were under the leadership of Gaddafi. And this most prosperous African country is now destroyed, and people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. Imperialism is not about development. Imperialism is about holding back and preventing economic development. Imperialism is keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. That's what imperialism is. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage. At the stage in which capitalism is no longer progressive and is no longer increasing and advancing technology and the means of production. It's when capitalism has gotten to the point that it imposes artificial restraints on human creativity, artificial restraints on economic development around the world, where in order to keep the capitalist economy functioning, degrowth becomes necessary. There was a friend of mine who taught me a lot about economics, and he used to talk about accumulation through destruction, which is a key aspect of capitalism in our time. The way that capitalist corporations in the West facilitate and continue to make profits at this point is through destructive accumulation. You think about prisons for profit. That is not economic development. Setting up a prison, getting paid by the government to imprison people who commit crimes, that is not something that leads to economic development. But if you look at the prison industrial complex and the way it was set up, where The government pays private corporations for every prisoner. And if a certain number of people are not locked up, then the government actually owes money to the private corporation. That's called destructive accumulation. There's nothing productive about a prison for profit system. It is creating an underclass of prison slave laborers. It is not a productive economy by any means. You think about the opioid epidemic, the fact that we had doctors who were being pushed by Big Pharma to overprescribe opioid medications because they wanted to make more money. And getting more people on opioids and pushing these opioid pain pills all throughout the U.S. economy, that is not something that is going to facilitate development in the U.S. economy. But it was a way that a lot of profits are being made. There's many, many examples of this in our time, of ways that capitalists make profits that are contrary to development. It used to be that the way capitalists made profits was they set up the factory, they hired people to work in the factory, the people in the factory made products, and those products got sold, and they made a profit from it. And that's the basis of early industrial capitalism. But as capitalism moved into the stage of imperialism, as the huge financial entities, the houses of finance came to dominate over industry, and they began spreading their tentacles all across the planet. As this got combined with the high-tech developments, we now have a stage of capitalism where the primary way that the capitalist economy is able to keep going and stimulate itself is through destructive accumulation. You can imagine modern capitalism as like a herd of vultures. They see a dead body and they jump on it, and they start consuming the dead body. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. We have got a cannibalistic capitalism that is no longer based on economic growth, that is consuming itself, and underlying all of this is the built-in problem of overproduction, or the tendency of the falling rate of profit. The fact that under capitalism, abundance creates poverty. People are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there is too much food. In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a great thing. But in capitalism, self-driving cars would lead to riots in the streets. Millions of people would lose their jobs. Well, that's stupid. If you invent a form of technology that eliminates a form of labor, if you make driving no longer necessary, that should be a great thing because there's less work for everyone to do. But in capitalism, that leads to millions of people no longer having a place in the economy. I talk often about the coal miner's riddle. The little boy says to his father, "Father, why is it so cold?" And the father says to the little boy, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the boy says, "Father, why can you not afford any coal to heat the stove?" And he says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." The little boy says, "Why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." That's capitalism. Production organized for profit. Abundance leading to poverty. This is the irrationality of the capitalist system. And that's what we're opposed to. Does that mean we're opposed to someone starting a bar or a restaurant of their own? Of course not. Does that mean that we're opposed to somebody having a new idea and inventing a new high-tech piece of software or a new development and getting compensated and rewarded for that. No. It means that we're opposed to having an economy that is centered around profit-making institutions. But rather, we believe that the means of production, the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power, should be organized to serve the people. Society should control the means of production. That is what socialism is. Socialism is when the commanding heights of the economy are centralized in order to make sure that they continue to carry out growth. It is when society as a whole comes together and takes control of the means of production in order to make sure that growth is no longer restrained by the idiocy, the stupidity of having profits in command. That is what socialism is. Socialism is the elimination of the irrational rule of profits, of the anarchy of production. That is what socialism is. Socialism is when the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power are forced to operate according to a central plan and in the interest of all society, not simply a wealthy few. That's what socialism is. That's what socialism is. And yes, in our time, 21st century socialism tends to include a very big market sector. It tends to include private corporations that enrich themselves and make profits. There tend to be millionaires in socialist societies, even billionaires. Right? We're not opposed to wealth. We are opposed to the chaos of the market. We are opposed to the anarchy of production. We are opposed to society allowing the market to dictate what goes on. We rather want rational human planning to control the means of production. That is what socialism is. And what infuriates me is it used to be that nobody talked about socialism. Socialism was an obscure concept. Anyone who believed in it in the United States was considered weird. But now there's talk of socialism everywhere. But it's not this. It's not this kind of socialism. You get a lot of people that think socialism is worker cooperatives. They have a narrative of, well, the people who work in the factory and the people who own the factory, there's an unequal relationship there. True. The employer gets the profits from the labor that the worker does. The employer gets to be the boss. It's not a democracy. You don't get to elect your boss. All true. And so socialism just means employee stock ownership programs. That is completely obscuring everything I just mentioned about the chaos of the market, the anarchy of production, the tendency of the falling rate of profits, imperialism. They throw all of that out and they make socialism versus capitalism a question of, does the government, the question of, do workers get a share of the profits? Do they get to elect their boss? Workplace democracy. Completely obscuring everything I just talked about. You're on the list, Gabby. And then you get some people who say, well, socialism is when the government gives people things. Socialism is when the government gives people health care. Socialism is when the government gives people college. Well, many socialist societies do that, but that is not the essence of what socialism is, and many capitalist societies do that. A welfare state exists in many Western countries. Free college, free medical care are good things, but they're not socialism. They're just a mechanism for stabilizing capitalism. This is part of the Keynesian consensus. This is part of the welfare state. That's not what socialism is. And you get a very common misconception. People say socialism is government ownership. Government ownership. Socialism is when the government owns things. Well, Saudi Arabia is not a socialist country. The government runs almost everything in Saudi Arabia. Not socialist. Singapore, huge amount of government ownership and government oversight of the economy. Not socialism. Socialism is when profits are no longer in command. Socialism is eliminating the chaos of the market, the anarchy of production. That is what socialism is. Socialism is not government ownership necessarily. If the government is simply facilitating in order to maximize the profits for a group of owners, right? If the government is just, the wing of the Saudi royal family, and they are facilitating the making of profits by the Saudi royal family and the importing of guest workers, slaves to overall see that, right? Singapore, Saudi Arabia, where you have a lot of state ownership in order to maximize the profits for a few ruling families who utilize the state-controlled economy to channel profits into their own hands, who import a bunch of guest worker slaves. That's not socialism. Socialism is not the government just giving people free healthcare and free education. That's a welfare state. Such things may exist in a socialist society, but that is not the essence of socialism. Socialism is not worker cooperative schemes. Socialism is the abolition of production organized for profit. All right. Well, it looks like somebody decided to jump on. So yeah, let's see how it goes. Hello. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Sjoerd. I'm from the Netherlands.
Oh, good to meet you. Say your name again.
That always happens when introducing myself to people who don't speak Dutch. It's Sjoerd. It's a very Dutch typical name.
Sjoerd.
Pretty close, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, how you doing?
Pretty good. Just got home from work and saw that you were opening up the stream. So I decided to see if I could drop by to talk about some things that I think are relevant to the anti-imperialist movement, which is in this case Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. You have mentioned it a few times on your streams.
Sure.
And if I may, I would like to first correct you on something. You say that these people have been living together for thousands of years. That's not entirely true, because the Azerbaijanis, they're a Turkic people, and the Turkic peoples moved to the Caucasus and Anatolia somewhere during the second millennium. So, and I believe the Azerbaijanis moved in there about 200-300 years ago. Minor point, but important, because the Azerbaijani government often uses a false historical narrative to justify their claims on Armenian territory.
Okay.
And what's fascinating to this situation is mostly, in my opinion, that things get complicated when looking at the allegiances of various players, because the government of Armenia is, in my opinion, no good at this point. It's pro-Western, pro-NATO, and for some reason doesn't understand that its major allies are Iran, possibly Syria and Russia, and not a country halfway around the world. But that's not something they seem to emphasize. But in the anti-imperialist camp, this often leads to a negative sentiment towards Armenia, and their case in Nagorno-Karabakh, which has been ethnically cleansed about a month ago by Azerbaijan. But I think the important part to take away is that even though the government is not anti-imperialist, the people of Armenia do not support their government, and even though Azerbaijan more and more aligns with Russia and Belarus recently because they have been diplomatically vilified, this does not mean that they are in the right in this situation. Things get complicated, of course, in geopolitics. And we should not forget that the Azerbaijani government basically gets 90% of its revenue from petroleum sales, and 90% of those sales go to NATO countries. So that's something
I know very little about, very, very little about, as you can tell probably from watching these streams. So, I can't dispute anything that you're saying. And, it is a kind of an interesting, nuanced perspective that you're bringing there, where Azerbaijan is closer to the anti-imperialist countries, Armenia is closer to the United States, but you would argue that when it comes to the territorial divisions that are there, you're on Armenia's side, and I have no grounds with which to argue with you. I'll just tell you that. I know so little about it. I'm not from this part of the world, and so this is interesting to bring the perspective. Now, my
It does
question
get
for
more
you is,
complicated though,
oh, go ahead, please continue.
because Azerbaijan, of course, it's basically an extension of Turkey, which is a NATO member, although sometimes a bit of a rogue NATO member. But it is extremely, extremely pro-Israel. The main arms supplier to Azerbaijan is Israel, and for that reason, they are very confrontational with Iran. In my opinion, currently the country most concerned about Armenian national security is not Armenia, but Iran, because they have been saying if Azerbaijan seizes Armenian territory to create a corridor, then Iran will intervene, whereas Armenia has said that they will probably not, or not really said, but indicated as much. And Iran allows Azerbaijan allows itself to be used by Israel as an intelligence outpost because it borders on northern Iran. So there have also been reports that the riots last year about the what you call morality police incident, that many of that had also been stirred up by Azerbaijani nationalists. So when comparing the relationship between Azerbaijan and Iran, and Azerbaijan and Russia, and then of course Russia and Iran, there's no clear lines that can be drawn through those camps.
Now, here's my question. Do you think that the recent flare-up that happened was something that the imperialists were staging, for their own benefit, related to what's going on with Russia and Ukraine?
Sorry, say that again.
The recent flare-up, between Armenians and Azerbaijan that happened, right? The confrontation. Do you think that the West facilitated that for their own ends, even if the cause is just? From your perspective, do you think that they were trying to inflame tensions for geostrategic reasons?
Well, definitely. I mean, the 2019 Rand Corporation report indicated as much, and planes from the Azerbaijani military cargo planes had been flying back and forth to Israel in the months prior, so people had a suspicion that something was going to happen.
Interesting.
And Russian peacekeepers were, I should say, preserving order in some sense in the Nagorno-Karabakh, or as the people themselves call it, Artsakh region.
Okay.
But Russia, of course, their number one priority is not to see that the fights of other countries in their neighborhood are concluded to a just end, but to basically maintain stability. And if that means that Azerbaijan controls the territory and 100,000 ethnic Armenians are kicked out, then they have to make a choice themselves and say, well, if Armenia indicates that they will not step up to defend these people, why should we? And I guess who can't really blame them? But that's also being used in anti-Russian pro-Western propaganda in Armenia to say, look, Russia has betrayed Artsakh, even though the Armenian government itself has indicated we don't even have military forces in Artsakh anymore.
So, one thing about the former Soviet Union is that there is a lot of disputed territory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's one thing that I've been learning about recently. I mean, obviously I knew about South Ossetia after what happened there, and I knew about, but there's, can you maybe just educate, our audience, right? In addition to this particular territory, there's many others. Can you talk about the kind of disputed territories in the former Soviet Union and what's going on there?
Yeah, well, there are, of course, many such instances. The Donbass is an example. Crimea is an example.
Yeah.
And Transnistria, or Pridnistrovia, as the people themselves are calling.
Right. I don't know much about that. Can you explain Transnistria?
Well, as I understand it, it's a region in Moldova which is east of the Dniester River, which is ethnically Russian by majority. And when in the 1990s the Soviet Union broke up, people there, I believe they declared themselves not independent from Moldova, but if I may be mistaken about the nuances of this, but I believe they even declared themselves the inheritor of the Soviet Union. They said, we don't even want to leave the Soviet Union. It's like a tiny piece of land with a few 100,000 inhabitants, but it's about the symbolism. They also keep up all the Soviet symbolism and respect their Soviet heritage, but they're ethnically Russian, and Russia intervened to basically freeze the conflict, as they did in Artsakh. They don't want either side to win. They just want stability in their region. And I think that's also the tension that happens in each of these conflicts around Russia. The United States wants to inflame these tensions to, as the Rand Corporation put it, extend Russia. And Russia, of course, well, who would want to set their neighbor's house on fire? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And the situation in Artsakh is, I think, very comparable to the situation in the Donbass, in the sense that these are people who were in the Soviet times part of the, in one case, Ukrainian, in the other case, Azerbaijani Soviet Republic. But through democratic initiatives, they decided to split off from the Soviet Republic they belonged to and wanted to join another. Well, of course, in the case of the Donbass, this did not happen in Soviet times, but in the case of Artsakh, it did. There was a democratic initiative in, I believe, 1988 to join the Armenian Socialist Soviet Republic. And in response, the Azerbaijani authorities started kicking Armenian villagers in the region out of their homes. And out of that, a war escalated. First, small scale, with militias fighting each other over control of these villages. And then in the early 1990s, it became a full-scale war after both countries gained their independence, ending in Armenian control of the territory, which, let's not forget, the people living there were Armenians, and they considered themselves as such. So under international law, in that sense, Azerbaijan had no claim to it other than that the international community said these were their borders. In the same way, Ukraine says the Donbass falls within their borders.
Now, let me ask you, are you Armenian?
No, but my family-in-law is. So
Oh, okay.
at first, I mean, it becomes very easy to then accuse me of being partisan in this. So I should say, at first, I used to be very skeptical of all of the narratives from that side of the argument, saying, well, that's just because you were raised to view it in such a way. But over time, when I actually learned, when I visited the place, and when I learned more about the principle of self-determination and the breakup of the Soviet Union, I got to see that this is what the people decided there, just like the people of Crimea decided they wanted to join Russia, and like the people of the Donbass decided that they also want to join Russia now. At first, they wanted their independence. So this, I think, should be the main principle. What do the people living there want? And then from there, you go looking for how can we make that into some kind of solution, not the other way around. And I think if you look at Palestine situation, it's similar. The people living there were Palestinians, and then the UN came by and said, how about you give away half your country? And then people like RFK Jr. say, well, the Palestinians rejected it. Of course they rejected it. If someone steals half your stuff and then or all your stuff and then says, let's share it 50-50, of course you don't agree to that. So I think that's the principle we should look at first, and then all the other factors start to come in.
Yeah. Well, no, this is all very interesting. And, you know, I mean, these conflicts flare up, and these are things I don't really know that much about. And so it's really, really good for you to bring that information on. Yeah. Is there anything else on your mind today? Anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
No, not particularly, but thanks for having me on.
Okay. Let me ask you, how did you find out about this YouTube channel and such?
I've been watching your streams for, I think, about a year. But
Okay.
due to work and scheduling and time difference, I never catch it live. But today I saw that your show was live, and I was a little frustrated on the commentary on the Armenian situation in the entire anti-imperialist camp. So I thought, let's see if I can hop on and talk about it.
Well, the audience seems to love you. Look, Jenny Linus, you're dropping some knowledge and classes in session. So thank you for
Thank
jumping
you.
on and sharing that. See, this is a topic I don't know very much about, and you gave some great insights. And I want to thank you for doing that. It's
Well,
really,
thank
really
you,
great.
Caleb.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about the political situation in the Netherlands at all?
Well, there's an election coming up next month.
Okay.
I decided that I will not vote for any party that is in favor of arming Ukraine. So that basically means that I will probably not vote. I think
Oh,
that says
all right.
enough because there
Very
is none. There is maybe one, but it's like a national conservative party which also supports more or less genocide in Palestine, and there are no good options. Even the Dutch Communist Party is, according to the founders of the party themselves, I mean, it's totally insignificant, but their line is also very dogmatic. They don't practice class analysis because for that there would have to be analysis, and it's just something they came to a conclusion about in the 70s and never thought about again. So all the classical tropes, you can't work with reactionaries, meaning people who are socially conservative. You can't work with capitalists, meaning small business owners who were crushed by pandemic measures and such. So the political landscape in the Netherlands is pretty depressing. And that's also reflected in the fact that there is no real policy made here. It's just in terms of foreign policy, it's just whatever the United States says, the Netherlands does.
Now, somebody sent a super chat, and we'll bring that on because it's about this stuff that you can talk about. But let me ask you real quick before we get to that. Can you wave a Palestinian flag in the Netherlands, or have they outlawed that?
I believe you still can.
Okay, that's good. That's something, right? It's better than France and Germany, Britain, right? So that's interesting. Okay. Well, this is Piha says Azerbaijan's president said that Kalojay massacre was an inside job. Now Pashinian gave up Nagorno-Karabakh behind Russia's back. What do you make of that? I mean, that I know nothing of this. What do you respond to Mr. Piha?
So the first part, the Khonjali massacre, is a massacre of civilians in a village that happened during the war in the 1990s, and there were various pogroms and massacres, and of course we should, and this also goes back to the Hamas situation right now. I think it's important to realize, if you don't want to get disillusioned, that in the context of a just struggle, unjust acts can happen.
Mhm.
That's very important to keep
Sure.
in mind. And there were the violence between Armenia and Azerbaijan began when in 1988 in some first let me say this: in Soviet times, a lot of Armenians lived in Azerbaijan and vice versa. And in 1988, Azerbaijani ethnic nationalists started murdering entire communities of Armenians living in eastern cities such as Baku, the capital, and Sumgait, which is, I think, most notorious. And in this context, people this inflamed ethnic hatred, and in the context of a war, that means that, of course, if you have two sides fighting, it may happen that a military unit takes a village, and instead of doing what a military unit should do, which is protect the civilians in that area, ethnic hatred is acted upon, and people are massacred. Tragically, this happens, and this particular situation, I think the Armenians dispute that this happened because this was, I think, the only Armenian executed massacre of this kind. The Armenians dispute it. I don't know, it might be true. Anyway, the other way around, there's also a lot of massacres, and this all distracts from the main question, which is, why is the fighting happening and what do the people living there want? And the second part, Pashinyan, so that's the prime minister, he gave up Nagorno-Karabakh. He said as much when in 2020, Armenia lost the war over Nagorno-Karabakh, which was in part due to the fact that Azerbaijan was basically stocked up with NATO weaponry, and partly because of incompetence on behalf of the Armenian government. They retreated all their military forces. And every time that there were negotiations on the resolution of the conflict, the Azerbaijani the Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan basically said, well, it's your territory, so you shouldn't talk to us about it. You should talk to the local authorities about it. Well, Azerbaijan is a petro state with a lot of money and 10 million citizens, and Nagorno-Karabakh is a tiny enclave with no resources, zero recognition by the international community, and 100,000 people. How do you think they're going to fare on their own? So this basically meant go ahead. And last month, the Azerbaijani president, he did. And well, the rest is history. 120,000 people were driven out of their homes because they knew that the alternative was basically to get shot or to live a miserable life as a third-class citizen at best.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you, Sjord, for did I butcher your name again, or?
It's okay. No need to try.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and giving our audience very important insights about a conflict that, I mean, I certainly know very little about, and I think our audience was also enlightened. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And great. And it sounds like you're a beloved member of the community. I mean, Scott likes you. He says fantastic guest. Jenny likes you. I mean, the audience seems to really appreciate what you had to say. Photon says awesome insights. Awesome insights from Photon. My wife is waving with pink hands, and so thank you very much, and
Right.
come back on sometime. Okay,
will do.
All
Thank
right.
you, Caleb.
All right, thank you. Great. That's great. Whenever we open it up, it's always exciting. We get people from different corners of the world bringing different insights. That was really, really neat. All right. Well, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And now we'll do the roll call. And then after that, I'll answer people's super chat or Rumble rant or Rockfin tip questions. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? This afternoon, I should say. Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us today? Names and locations. Names and locations. Love Blind Hate in Binghamton, New York. Welcome. Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati. Carolina Uwa in Berlin. Welcome, Carolina. Chris in Salt Lake City. Scott in Miami, Florida on lunch break. Joe in New Jersey, home of the revolution. Bum, bum, bum. Names and location. Patch in Arizona. Meredith and Quinn from Eatonville, Washington. Michael in Texas. When you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where Michael's going to be. All right. A snow-ridden Oslo. Very good. Very, very good. Zach in Tennessee. Starcraft Fellow, New Yorker. Very good. Conrad from Poland. Welcome, Conrad. Alex and Susan from Montreal. Welcome, Alex and Susan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to have you with us. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody on the Rumble? Anyone on the Rumble? I don't see any names on the Rumble. On the Rockfin. Names and locations. Names and locations. Always good to know who's watching. Anyone else? Names and locations. Patch in Arizona. Welcome, Patch. I don't know what that means. I think it's Polish. That's okay. There we go. There we go. Names and locations. Bruce Monroe in the Philippines. Welcome, Bruce. All righty. So we have 2 super chats. One was a super. There was 3 actually, but one was for our guest, and so we already answered that one from Piha. But now we have 2 super chats. So if there's any more super chat questions that people have, they want me to respond to. Oh, we got Alan Rice from South Korea. Welcome, Alan Rice. If we got any more super chats for me to to answer, now would be the time to send them. So first one we've got, do you remember Meir Kahane or Morton Downey Jr.? I have a link. Kahane is peak Zionism. Proto-Fox News host Morton Downey Jr. is better on Palestine than most liberals. Meir Kahane, very interesting story. So here in New York City, there's a neighborhood called Canarsie. I think it's Canarsie is the name of the neighborhood. I could be mistaken, but there's a neighborhood in Queens that, historically was Jewish and whites only. And there started to be black people moving into the neighborhood. And Meir Kahane and his buddies, they didn't particularly like the idea of black people moving into the neighborhood. So they formed something called the Jewish Defense League, the JDL. And originally, and again, no one wants to talk about this, originally the JDL was not focused on Israel-Palestine issues. It was about keeping black people from moving into Jewish neighborhoods, right? No one ever wants to talk about that. But the JDL originally was formed in order to keep black people from moving into Jewish neighborhoods in New York City, and particularly in Queens. Queens, New York City, historically, not anymore. Queens, New York, historically has been the Republican conservative borough, right? Queens, Queens tends to be, it's where I think, what is it? One of those rock bands. Oh, see, Canarsie is in Brooklyn. So I don't even know. Queens, maybe must have been a Queens neighborhood then. I forget which neighborhood it was, but it was one of these neighborhoods. I think it was in Queens that, oh goodness. That it was one of these neighborhoods in Queens that Meir Kahane, he started out, he and his buddies wanted to keep black people from moving into this Jewish neighborhood. It was Queens, and it was, that was, Jackson Heights, they were trying to keep black people from moving into Jewish neighborhoods. I believe Meir Kahane wrote a book called about why Jews should support the Vietnam War. He was always kind of a right-wing conservative, anti-communist, and he wrote this book about why Jews should support the Vietnam War. I forget, it was like the stake of Jews in Vietnam. He was a right-wing dude, and he organized this group, the Jewish Defense League, that would terrorize black people if they moved into Jewish neighborhoods, would break their windows, would threaten them, kind of Ku Klux Klan kind of activity, except it was done by Jewish white people against black people rather than by, Protestant white people, Catholic white people. It was just kind of a general racist individual, very much, supporting the NYPD and the police, very much against black people, very much, just that's what the JDL was. So then, after that, obviously, 1967, you have the 1967 war between Israel and the Arab states, where Egypt is kind of leading the Arab world to fight against Israel. And in the 1967 war, Meir Kahane, being a Zionist, became a big supporter of Israel, was a big supporter of Israel. And so he and the Jewish Defense League went around targeting the dissidents, the Arab Americans, as well as communists who were supporting the Palestinians with violence. The JDL just targeted them with straight up fascist violence, baseball bats and, bike lock chains. And if they saw anybody who was supporting Palestine, they would respond to them with violence, and that was what they did. They were the JDL, and they were just a violent group of Zionists. I've talked to older communists who describe, at one point they went into the office of the International Action Center that was run by Ramsey Clark, and they held people at gunpoint, and they trashed the office while they held people at gunpoint. There would be protests that would be pro-Palestine, and they would show up with their bike lock chains and their baseball bats, and they would just beat people up. They were just a violent group of people, the JDL. What's interesting is there's a very prominent elected official in New York City who brags about having been a JDL member. I'm trying to remember his name, but he's a local elected official who is a former JDL terrorist himself, and says that the time he spent working with Meir Kahane was the best time of his life. I can't remember his name, but he's a former JDL terrorist who's a very prominent politician in Brooklyn. So that's worth pointing out. Yeah, the JDL. Now, the leader of the JDL was this guy, Meir Kahane. And Meir Kahane, he and his followers, eventually they all just moved to Israel, because they argued that, the Jews need to be in Israel. And Meir Kahane was murdered. And that what's interesting is that, Meir Kahane, his activities were so violent that often Israel itself was trying to restrain him, because he was acting in ways that were not in the overall strategic interest of Israel. And this happens a lot with like straight up violent fascists, right? His slogan was "For every Jew, a 22," right? And he was being very, very violent. And, in New York City, 1990, he was shot on the street, basically, outside his hotel, from what I understand, and the guy who shot him was acquitted. And the guy who shot him was, I believe, an Arab American activist. But he showed the jury that Meir Kahane was racist. And the prosecution in the case, again, even Israel didn't much care for Meir Kahane because he was considered to be such a such a kind of a liability. I mean, the Jewish Defense League was declared a terrorist organization by Israel. That it seemed like that he was basically he was basically killed, and that even though he was killed by Arab Americans, I mean, he had killed and assassinated a number of Arab American and pro-Palestine activists. They had targeted Soviet diplomats during the 1980s. They targeted the Soviet Union. Baruch Goldstein, a JDL member, killed 29 Muslims, and unbelievable. I mean, this was just a murderous group of people. Murderous group of people, the JDL. Meir Kahane was shot outside of his hotel in New York City, and the guy who shot him was put on trial for killing Meir Kahane, and was found not guilty, because the jury had a lot of people of color on it, and they showed all the nasty things that Meir Kahane had said about black people, and the jury found the guy who killed Meir Kahane not guilty. And it was a very famous case. So I believe, there you go. He was found not guilty of murder, but then they eventually charged him with, possession of an illegal firearm or something like that. Right. So it's a pretty wild case. But Meir Kahane and Kahaneism. This is a particularly fascistic form of Zionism that the Israelis themselves have often tried to restrain, because it's it's like a PR disaster, right? Those are the people that say blatantly racist things. But what's interesting is that JDL stuff still has a lot of influence in Brooklyn, New York. See, it's weird. In New York City, you have so many Jews, right? There's such a huge Jewish population in New York City that because of that, you have many different political strands within the Jewish community, and Kahaneism, that kind of thing, is very, very, it exists, right? It has roots. I mean, it's fringe, right? Just like, most black people are not Black Hebrew Israelites. Most black people are not associated with the new Black Panther Party, etc. But, those groups do exist in the black community. And among Jews in New York City, the overwhelming majority are Zionists, but the Kahaneist strand of Zionism that is outlawed by Israel, even because it's associated with, illegal violence that the Israeli government can't control, and they can't restrain, and etc. And it's associated with blatant racism that, hurts Israel's image and such. That strand of politics, it does have roots in Brooklyn, and there is, I cannot remember his name for the life of me. Dov Hykind. Dov Hykind. Yeah, Dov Hykind is a member. He's an elected official in New York City. I don't know if he's still in office. Yeah, he's former. He lost his seat, but for many years he was a local Brooklyn politician, Dov Hykind, who was a former JDL terrorist. You can read about him, Dov Hykind, and I did stories about him when I worked for Press TV. Dov Hykind. We would talk about Dov Hykind. Dov Hykind is a former JDL terrorist and extremist. And one thing, I mean, and this is something that living in New York City, you just have to learn about because it's not like the rest of the country. But I remember there was some kind of anti-Semitic incident when I first moved to New York. I can't remember what it was. And so there was a synagogue in New Jersey that started training its members in how to use AK-47s. And they started, having press conferences about, we're training synagogue members to have AK-47s. And you saw these Orthodox Jews in their Orthodox Jewish attire brandishing AK-47s. And I saw that happening. That was in New Jersey, New York City area. And I said, I made a Facebook post. I said, imagine that a mosque did this. Which I thought was a pretty sensible thing to say, right? Imagine, right? Now, technically, you're legally allowed to, have firearms in the United States. But if a mosque, if a Muslim Islamic center or mosque were to distribute firearms or to have firearms, they would be arrested immediately. They would call it terrorism and they would all be arrested. However, this synagogue, after this anti-Semitic incident, they made a big point in the media of, they're waving their guns around. We have guns, and I remember I made a Facebook post or a blog post. I said, what if a mosque did this? That shows the double standard. And what surprised me was there were communists who were anti-Israel who told me I should take that post down. And I was like, what? You guys support the Palestinians. You support the Muslim community. What's wrong with this? And they said, well, it's really sad. Anti-Semitism is really, really sad. And, there's a history of anti-Semitism there. Just take that post down. And I was shocked. And they said, I thought, what's wrong with saying this? I think I still stand by that post. I don't think there was anything wrong with pointing out the double standard. But there were even communists who said that post I made pointing out that what this synagogue in New Jersey was doing, waving their guns around, if a mosque in the United States did that, how the response would be. They said that post was offensive. They said, and that I will tell you that one of my biggest criticisms of communist groups in the United States is that they tend to be small and isolated, and there tends to be a lot of soft Zionism in them, not hard Zionism. A lot of them are blatantly anti-Israel. But there's this soft Zionism, which is stuff like that, right? If you really support the Muslim community, right, you should make it clear that they have the right, they have just as much right to have guns as the people at a synagogue do. And the fact that a synagogue is allowed to wave guns around and a mosque isn't, that's a double standard. And the fact that they get uncomfortable with that. And they can't tell you why, but that just doesn't sit right with me. Why doesn't it sit right with you? Right? Don't you support the Palestinians? Don't you support Muslims? Well, isn't it unfair that, at a synagogue, they're allowed to raise firearms around and at a mosque, they're not? Isn't that worth pointing out? And it just makes them uncomfortable, right? That is soft Zionism, right? And it's because they still have that Zionist narrative that Jews are the most oppressed people in the world, that no one understands how oppressed they are. And that's soft Zionism. And it's not Judaism, because I know, Norman Finkelstein doesn't feel that way. Max Blumenthal doesn't feel that way. But they're among Jewish communists, even Jewish anti-Israel communists. There is this soft Zionism that says, my favorite example is when I would go to pro-Palestine rallies with Jewish communists. We would hear pro-Israel folks saying the most blatantly racist things. Arabs are inferior. Arabs are dogs. Arabs are subhuman. They would say the most blatantly racist things. And their response was, oh, that's really sad. You know, it's so sad. It's just so sad that they believe that. Meanwhile, with Trump supporters, with Republicans, with conservative Christians, they were all evil. They're all bigots. Oh, they all ought to burn. They're all awful people. But blatantly racist and hateful things said by Zionists were, oh, it's just so sad, right? And that there was this feeling that, well, you know, if Jewish people are racist, if Jewish people are bigoted, that's understandable. It's just a tragic mistake. But if non-Jews do it, especially non-Jewish white people do it, they're evil. And that it's ethnic bigotry, right? And that's what soft Zionism is. And I got really tired of it. You know, they sat me down. I remember when I was in Iran, I was talking to some people at a conference, and I was in the Workers' World Party, and they sat me down and they said, Caleb, you know, you're never going to be allowed to be a prominent leader of this group, you know, the Workers' World Party, because you're not a Jew. You know that, right? And they were telling the truth. I mean, it took me a long time to realize that, but Fred Goldstein hated me on an ethnic level, right? He saw me as a non-Jew. He saw me as a Midwestern white person, you know, who grew up Christian. And, you know, Fred Goldstein, very anti-Israel, very, very anti-Israel. He'd gotten in fistfights with the JDL. But as far as he was concerned, I was a Gentile. I was a Goyim, you know, and I was the enemy. And my race, my ethnicity were a bunch of racist Bush and Trump supporters. And we're a bunch of ignorant Christians who carry out pogroms. Look, there's this soft Zionism in communist spaces. It is a bigger problem. It's not just that I had a bad personal experience, right? Right. And, you know, it's not just that. The issue is more than that. The issue is that there's a certain demographic of people in America who become communists, right? Grandpa got off the boat from Sweden or wherever, right? And, you know, Grandpa got off the boat, you know, from Poland or Russia or whatever in 1900. And they were communists because they were poor, they were hungry, they were from a country where the revolutionary tradition was alive. And then, you know, they joined the Communist Party. You know, they joined the Communist Party USA. They were radicals or whatever. But then after World War II, you know, they got college education. The U.S. economy expanded. They moved into the middle class. And then their kids became 1960s radicals, SDS, Weathermen, you know, the various new communist groups, the Trotskyites, whatever. And now their kids are woke, right? And this demographic, right? This like third generation American communism. Yeah, like Chomsky. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. A lot of them supported Israel when Israel was created. A lot of them were very opposed to the Vietnam War, but were big supporters of Israel and the 67 war. And a lot of them have just been absorbed into the Democratic Party. This is not the future of American communism. If you think communism in America is going to expand and become popular if it's under these people's control, you're delusional, right? There's very few of them left, right? Norman Finkelstein, Max Blumenthal, Amy Goodman, you know, they're from this milieu. Amy Goodman's parents, I understand, were in the Communist Party USA. Noam Chomsky's parents were in the Communist Party USA. I guess Max Blumenthal is a different story, right? His father was Sidney Blumenthal, and that's a whole other thing. But Norman Finkelstein was a 70s Maoist, and it's like, this is a certain demographic of people that it's in their blood, ethnically. They were brought up to believe communism is a good thing, to believe anti-communism is anti-Semitic, or like when people are being anti-communist, that's code for hating Jews. They're brought up to think that the Soviet Union is good. And a lot of them are also brought up to be skeptical of Zionism, right? And that's a very small minority among American Jews, but they have the feeling that Zionism is a Western imperialist plot. And, this demographic, they've done heroic things and all of that. They're not the future of communism in America. You're not going to ever have a communist revolution in America led by this demographic, because it gets smaller. It was huge in the 1930s. It got smaller in the 1950s and 60s. It got even smaller in the 1980s, and it's tiny now. It's a really, really small demographic, and it's ethnic for them. It is an ethnic thing, right? And they are not the future of American communism. The American working class is not going to rise up under the leadership of these folks, and they don't want them to. Right. I mean, it's it's a whole nother story. And that some of them are better than others. Norman Finkelstein is very brave, and he calls out the soft Zionism and such. And, but there is an element with, I just mentioned Fred Goldstein, for example. He hated, as much as he had all this populist rhetoric and he had this kind of fake working class accent and all of his rhetoric, he hated American workers. He hated the bulk of the American working class, right? Sam Marcy, again, brilliant guy, and all of that, but just didn't understand that there were red states, and that this demographic that I'm describing is not the future of American communism. And when I talk about out of the movement to the masses, part of it means these people can't own American communism anymore, because they do own it. They own it like a franchise, right? It's like McDonald's. They inherited the farm. It's Communist Party USA, the Workers' World Party, the PSL. It's these people's property, right? It's their family business, right? The Becker family, right? The Beckers, the Becker clan, right? Brian Becker, Richard Becker, Gloria La Riva, the wife of Richard Becker, Ben Becker, the son of Brian Becker. It is their family property. They consider communism to be their property, right? It's their cash cow. They get to run American communism. And of course, it remains small and irrelevant because they have to stay in charge of it, because it's their cash cow. It's their business, right? And that's why American communism is remaining fringe, because there's a demographic, a fringe demographic of certain people, many of whom are Jewish. I don't think the Beckers are Jewish. I think the Beckers are are like German-American Christians, but they're from upstate New York or whatever. And there's a certain fringe demographic of people who American communism is their property. And because of that, it's not going to expand. And that's why they hate CPI so viciously. That's why the Communist Party published a hit piece against us. That's why the first thing, if you join PSL, the first thing they're going to say is, CPI is bad. They're a bunch of racists. That's why there's such a vicious campaign against the Center for Political Innovation, because we refuse to let these assholes run American communism any longer, right? We're telling the Brian Beckers and the Fred Goldsteins and the Joe Sims and all of them, we're telling them, no, you don't get to own American communism anymore. We're going to recruit average Americans. And in order to do that, we're going to break your rules. Yeah, I know American flags are cringe and they scare you. We're going to wave them. I know you hate Christianity. You think Christianity is just a big conspiracy to kill Jews and that we're all ignorant and stupid for being Christians. But you know what? We believe Jesus was the first communist. And we think that there's many, many Christian values that can be applied to communism. So, I'm sorry if we're breaking your rules by appealing to Christians. And we are going to break all of your rules, and we're going to recruit the actual American working class, and we're going to break your fucking franchise. That's what we're going to do. We're going to break your franchise. You're not going to get to own American communism anymore as your family business. You're not going to do it, right? You're not going to get to own it anymore. And that's why they hate us. Thank you. Thank you. That's why they hate us so much, is because for them, communism is their little fringe existence. It's their special way of being separate from the American people. And not going to have it. Not going to have it. Anyway, someone's going to take that rant out of context and say, I hate Jews. I've been through it all before. I don't hate Jews. Some of my best friends are Jewish, and I have made mistakes before. There have been things I've said before that have been blatantly offensive, and I do apologize to the Jewish community for that. But at the same time, no, you can't keep communism as your property. You can't do it. So there you go. All right. How come regular folks are always broke? They blame that we don't have to save money. Well, I'll tell you why folks are always broke, Gabby, is because it's more profitable for them to have you be broke. Because when you're broke, you have to take out loans. When you're broke, your bank charges you overdraft fees. They've turned you being broke into a way to make money. It used to be that they made money by you having money and buying products for your family, right? It used to be that if you had a good paying job, you went to the store and you bought things, and that made them wealthier. But then they realized that they could turn you being broke into a way to get more money out of you, right? And that's the sick thing about American economy. If you're broke, you're going to have to get a loan, and then you're going to get in debt. If you're broke, your bank is going to charge you overdraft fees. If you're broke, your landlord is going to charge you rent late fees. They've turned you being broke into a way to make money. This is when I talk about destructive accumulation in the capitalist system. This is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? In the early days of capitalism, the way they made money was by you having money. Now, They make money by you being broke, and they've turned you being broke into a way to milk even more money out of you. It's like debtor's prison, right? I mean, it's like they've found ways to make you more profitable by being broke than by having money. This is capitalism in its cannibalistic, decaying stage. That's what I'm talking about. All right. The Yemeni armed forces recently announced their entry into the Israeli conflict in response to the Israelis' expansion on the ground. I think Lebanon joins later. Look, the Yemeni people, they are very anti-Israel. The Houthi slogan that they have painted, death to America, death to Israel, curse the Jews, God is great. That is the slogan that the Houthi movement paints everywhere. It's unfortunate they say curse the Jews. Obviously, we're against any form of ethnic bigotry, but for them, they mean Zionists. They mean Israel. You know, the Yemeni people, in the Yemeni movement, Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, they are solidly on the side of the Palestinian people. It doesn't surprise me what they're saying. It doesn't surprise me at all. And I mean, again, I worry about how this could escalate, but I got to tell you, things are escalating right now at like the worst time for Israel and the United States. The Arab world is united in opposition to Israel. Russia and China and the whole world is condemning Israel and calling for a ceasefire right now. And I have never seen America and Israel so isolated. And so this puts Iran in a position where Iran, by being the biggest and loudest anti-Israel voice, is not isolated at all, right? When Barack Obama came into office, he tried to divide the Muslim world, Sunnis against Shias, and isolate Iran. All of that's been reversed. So, right now in the Middle East, if you want to be popular, people see Israel's crimes, you position yourselves as the most anti-Israel. And so, yeah, we need a de-escalation. We need a ceasefire, and we need this not to turn into World War III. That's what we need. We need a de-escalation. We need a ceasefire. And on that note, folks, I'm going to put on the closing music. I got to get ready for my live to cover the UN Security Council. So I'm going to put on the closing music, but I'll be back tonight. I'm going to try to do it earlier than usual tonight, but I'll be back. I'm going to put on the closing music. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All righty. Thanks, everybody.